Hi, Max Keiser with the Keiser Report. You know, there's an old adage in America, fake it till you make it. And we've had brilliant examples of that in history. P.T. Barnum, for example, or Steve Jobs at Apple. He stole a lot of technology from the government and faked it, and then he made it. Now it's the biggest company in the world. Now we have Donald Trump, the ultimate fake it till you make it. As such, here's my advice to all you wannabe billionaires. Learn how to play golf. That's right. It's the best game in the world to get to know and schmooze with billionaires. That's why I'm standing in an enormous sand trap next to a lake in the middle of nowhere. I'm working on my wedge game. Look that up. Stacy?
In fact, this is like a volleyball pit. I don't know if you saw the volleyball net behind you.
Oh my God, no wonder my handicap is so high. I'm not even on a golf course.
I wanted to demonstrate to the people the American health system. Here I'm gonna eat some coffee cake. It's pretty good. And then do some exercise here. This kind of doesn't make any sense, really, right? Well, neither does the healthcare system here in America. The headline from the Financial Times, Gillian Tett, she caught up with Keiser Report. She's on our very own theme about what happened with the Trump administration. Did Obamacare help Trump? Obamacare is a story of people who feel trapped in a capricious system that they don't understand. A few weeks ago, a friend in New York received a call from his stepmother in North Carolina. She was upset and scared. In recent years, this woman, who I will call Sally, has grappled with ill health. She was recently refused disability benefits and has a very tight household budget, existing on $1,400 a month. But now she has been hit by another blow. 2 years ago, she joined the Obamacare health scheme, paying $356 a month in premiums. But last month, she was told that the cost had jumped to $1,116 or $631 with Sally's tax credit. So her premiums doubled from last year.
Yes.
She felt like very angry that it was a capricious system and very random and nasty.
Well, not only that, but it's an unconstitutional tax. I mean, it's a tax, and you can't just willy-nilly apply a tax. But healthcare, the way it's being operated in America, goes against a couple of hundred years of enlightened thinking. Remember the Industrial Revolution in England? They brought about standardization. Things like nuts and bolts were standardized so that factories and industry could scale and become huge. And then in the 1980s, remember, Citibank introduced the automatic teller machine. But did they introduce a unique automatic teller machine only good for Citibank? No, they created a network of automatic teller machines that worked at all banks. You could use the same card in banks all over the world, and it scaled. And it became huge, and it became convenient. Walter Wriston said it was the only banking innovation at all that we've ever had in 25 years. Then comes healthcare, and they're saying, let's make it unique. Let's make it so that it's impossible to actually get healthcare in a convenient way. Let's charge an exorbitant amount. Let's go the opposite of scaling. Let's go the opposite of the Enlightenment. Let's go the opposite of the American notion of freedom and democracy. Let's make it bespoke, like a Savile Row suit cutter. And let's make it so that everyone who wears these suits is automatically identified as a Ponce. Let's call it the American Ponce system, because that's what we got.
You speak of networks, and you and I were over at UNC, University of North Carolina. They have an amazing hospital, amazing research hospital, amazing medical school there. And that, however, is not in the one network available to anybody living in this area who has to buy Obamacare. And we made this little film.
That's what I'm saying. It's not a network. They're not networked. They're not connected. They don't make any sense. It's not a business. It's not a scalable business. It's absurd. Okay, it's backwards.
Okay, he says that again in this film we're inserting. The reason why I wanted to come here is because we want to talk about this fictional woman named Sally that the Financial Times' Gillian Tett mentions, because she's on Obamacare, and were Sally of North Carolina to live here in the Chapel Hill region, UNC would not be available to her. This would not be an option with Blue Cross Blue Shield, which obviously we don't want to advertise, but the fact is Blue Cross Blue Shield is essentially the only option here. It's like the Soviet supermarket. That's the one supermarket you have available to you. And if Sally were living here and paying that $650 a month, she would not be allowed to go here, and yet UNC, it's a big university. They have a university, they have medical school, they have law school, they have all sorts of undergraduate school and stuff like that, has a budget of $2.4 billion. 20% of that is funded through the state taxes. So Sally would not be allowed to come here, even though 20% of her her taxes fund UNC. You know where the rest of the budget of UNC comes from? Not only from tuition, but from fees.
All right.
Patient fees. So who's going here? Private sector, people with private insurance from their companies, but Medicare and Medicaid. Who pays that? Sally's federal taxes. So if you have Medicare or Medicaid, you can come here. Sally's federal taxes are paying for that. Her state taxes are paying for UNC's. But this is not on the Obamacare policy.
Right, so I mean, the way that that's a layer cake of inefficiency. And you mentioned the old Soviet Union. Yeah, this is what you'd expect in a state that has no competition. Free competition in America should produce competitively priced health care that's convenient, but you don't see that here. It's become a captive audience of people who are sick. Therefore, you've got corporations who take advantage of that and are milking the system and bilking the system with the help of a lot of politicians who are getting in on the cream on this.
But as Jillian Tett points out, is the capriciousness of the nature of this program. So here you are, a taxpayer, you earn too much to qualify for subsidies or Medicaid. Your federal taxes are paying for all of the Medicare and Medicaid patients who could come to this hospital. You yourself have to go to Duke. Duke is actually probably a better hospital, certainly on national rankings. However, it is 30, 40 minutes drive from here, up the road. You have to go 30, 40 minutes away. Imagine if you're being treated for cancer or something. They didn't say what Sally had, but she was apparently sick and had been treated. We don't know what it was. But if she were having to get chemotherapy, she's having to drive 30, 40 minutes to Duke. If she's on Obamacare, she's not able to go to, if she lives in Chapel Hill, to UNC.
Right. So all in all, it's what we're showing here is just a completely dysfunctional system. And my point, and I'll repeat it, is that you want your health care, education, and transportation in a community functioning in a way that if need be, the government is subsidizing or managing, because that's what they're good at. The single payer healthcare system means that you get the best prices for drugs, for medical services. You don't want competition in a way that drives up prices and reduces the efficiency, and you end up with the worst of all possible systems, which is the current U.S. healthcare system.
So, as Jillian Tett mentions, this is what she believes was the cause of Trump winning. Nobody wanted to mention it. We were the only ones, I believe, in the financial news that warned of this as an issue. I myself looked here because we're in North Carolina, and I looked for what it would cost for me and Max to be on this Obamacare policy. And for example, it would cost between $1,400 a month for the two of us on a bronze plan, the least of the plans. And for a gold plan, it would cost just under $2,000 a month. So $24,000 a year we would have to come up with. And it's really difficult to see how much you would actually, there's a theoretical out-of-pocket expense that you would be exposed to, but it's very difficult on the site to understand actually how much it's either something like $12,000 or up to $44,000 that we would be exposed to.
Well, the cost makes you sick. So what's the point of that? So, healthcare needs to be designed in a way that delivers the product, health, at a price that makes sense for the community. Healthcare is one of those things that shouldn't be just thrown over to privateers and sharks. It doesn't lend itself to the type of competition you find in the private sector, because the benefits accrued to society as a whole, like education or transportation, end up in having a robust, scalable society that generates entrepreneurs who then create private enterprise on top of the layer of government-subsidized infrastructure. That's why Steve Jobs and Apple became huge, is because they stole government, well, they borrowed or they used government-financed technology. Everything in an iPhone was created by the government.
Government funding, DARPA.
Yeah.
And that's the thing about UNC. They receive the state funds and the federal funds, as we had said. But in terms of the messaging and the strategy of Trump, what he's messaging here is, as Gillian Tett says, that all the pundits, all the Democrats trying to understand why they lost, they're all saying, you know, they're coming up with crazy reasons like the FBI investigation and all these other things and cheating and stuff like that. But she says that, put it another way, Obamacare is not just a tale about health care and costs. It is also a story of people who feel trapped in a capricious system that they don't understand, much less control.
Like colonization. In other words, you had the Boston Tea Party, and they threw the tea over there because of a tax issue with the colonies against the empire. Obamacare is a tax, and the colonized victims of this tax have staged an insurrection called Donald Trump. Now Donald Trump is in a position to see how far he can go in getting rid of the cacistocracy, rule by the least qualified.
And she also mentions that economists, over and over she talks about economists, to economists, the logic of rising Obamacare premiums is so obvious that they are surprised that anybody can be surprised. So I call your attention to, prior to the election, we did note that this would happen, that this was likely to happen, that people were angry with Obamacare costs. And here I got into a little Twitter spat with Dean Baker, who is a left-wing economist and he was very pro-Hillary Clinton, anti-Trump. And when I had mentioned that, so he responded to somebody, David Schwall, who said, friend showed me his Blue Cross Blue Shield insurance for next year went up 127% year on year. Glad uncovered people now have coverage, but this system is beyond broken. Dean Baker responded, wow, I know someone whose insurance went up 250% in 2004. What does that mean? Serious people take averages. And that's when I responded to him. This was on the eve of the election, November 4th. I said, individuals vote, not averages. Right? And if you want to talk averages, those were 22% nationally, over 40% here in North Carolina, 116% in Arizona, and those were the people angry about that. And he responded, just as Gillian Tett would say, he said, how about the individuals who got insurance who would be dead otherwise? Which is a classic Republican response to say, here in North Carolina, do we want to dump all that pig slue, slop and feces into the water system? Because it's going to poison everybody downstream. And the Republicans will say, well, what about all those jobs at the pig factory? Don't you care about those individuals and their jobs?
Yeah, well, Dean Baker engages clearly what's called junk economics. You know, they're cherry-picking data to support a fallacious argument. It doesn't make any sense, Dean Baker's argument. He lost, and now he's reaching into his bag of fallacious arguments, like Paul Krugman, and just trying to justify their insanity. But they're losers. So, fortunately, they'll just go away, and we won't hear from them. And I doubt that will be the case because they're also loudmouths.
Anyway, and by the way, I'm sure everybody in the comment section has already noted that I don't have an umbrella. Max, speaking of Ponce, has an umbrella because he thinks he's out on the golf course, but in fact we're on the volleyball court.
Well, this is a very tricky shot. It's actually a two-shot penalty to find yourself not even on a golf course. So I'm going to try to, well, I think the nearest golf hole here is about 2.7 miles away, so I'm going to actually use my golf cannon. And that's going to do it. Stay tuned for the second half. Much more golf and stuff.
ఇట్లా గేట్ పెట్టుకొని ఉంది డోర్ దగ్గరికి లా ఉంది ఏంది తలుపు పెట్టేసుకున్నాం అంటే లేదు తీయనంటే తీసేసుకున్నాం మంద డబ్బా చేతులు ఉంది ఎందుకు ఇట్లా చెప్పక మా మధ్య వాళ్ళకి ఇట్లా వీళ్ళందరూ ఇక్కడనే ఉంటే మొత్తుకోగానే వచ్చేసింది.
At the national level in the last 20 years 2.9 lakh farmers have committed suicide.
BT cotton has been promoted as something which actually solves the problems of the Indian farmers. Something which comes as is thrust upon the farmers as a solution starts creating more problems.
Monsanto has created monopolistic control over the cottonseed market in India. Only BT cotton is available. Normal cottonseed is largely unavailable to Indian farmers.
Welcome back to the Keiser Report. Alrighty, let's talk to Michael Carmichael of PlanetaryMovement.org. He started his political career working as a strategist for Robert Kennedy and continued advising Democratic candidates all the way up to Bernie Sanders in 2016. Michael, welcome.
Thank you, Max, for inviting me.
All right, cool.
So good.
Now, let me just ask you a question. You're a political strategist, so what did Hillary do wrong in terms of strategy?
I'd answer that. I'd almost prefer to answer that with a question. What did she do right? If there was a mistake to make, they made it.
What was the primary mistake?
The primary mistake was Ready for Hillary, which launched in 2014. It was far too early. And the other thing was this. She did not have a clear message. She was running basically an identity campaign, Max.
Meaning what?
That she wanted to become the first woman president.
That was pretty much the focus of her entire campaign. She returned to that theme over and over again. And yet I talked to many women during the campaign who rejected her claim of even being a feminist, and they seem to get beyond the idea of the first woman president as being meaningful in some way. We've already had many women leaders in countries around the world. It's like that train has left the station already. They just wanted somebody who was going to represent their interests a little bit more cleanly and clearly, I think.
Well, I think you're absolutely right about that, and the proof is in the pudding. Running against Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton lost white women. Trump got 53% of white women, so that proves your point.
All righty. Now, how about Bernie Sanders? Would he have won?
Yes, he would have won by
Okay.
a substantial margin.
It seemed the momentum was definitely his way. He was pulling in the crowds like Trump was pulling in crowds. And yet the DNC, the Democratic National Convention, why? I thought their idea was to get their person elected, not what were they thinking?
Well, obviously, they were thinking that they wanted to prevent Bernie Sanders from getting the nomination. That we know through the WikiLeaks releases.
Right.
And this is what led to the decapitation of the DNC immediately before the Democratic National Convention, when Debbie Wasserman Schultz and 3 of her top staff had to resign.
When Bernie Sanders basically folded in the waning hours of his campaign and throwing his support to Hillary, it reminded me of Dennis Kucinich. Remember back in the healthcare debate, he was all for this kind of universal healthcare issue, and then Obama took him up on the plane for a couple hours, and he totally reversed himself. I mean, Bernie Sanders just seems like your average turncoat, opportunistic politician, not worth his salt. I mean, because he folded his tent like he folded like a cheap suit at the end of the day, right? So the guy's worthless.
No, I disagree with you on both counts. I think that Kucinich and Sanders are the most articulate proponents we have for the progressive agenda in Congress. And it wasn't exactly like you described in Dennis's case, nor in Bernie's. They have very strong reasons, and they were given a lot of new information from the president.
New information?
Yeah, which we're not privy to.
Okay.
So we don't know everything. We're not omniscient.
All right, we'll get to that in a minute. What about the strategy of Hillary having a public persona against trade deals like TPP, but a private persona with Goldman Sachs for such trade deals? That didn't work, did it?
Well, you've hit the nail on the head. I mean, her message was so ambiguous. It was vague. Nobody really understood where she stood, and this led to a lack of trust and credibility for her campaign. This is always a fatal error. Even though she was running against Donald Trump, who turned out to at least win the Electoral College. But you know, this is an extremely ambiguous campaign because Hillary Clinton clearly did win the popular vote. Now, mind you, I've got a lot of issues with Hillary Clinton. In fact, I've battled her for years. I was Dennis Kucinich's senior advisor in his campaign in 2007 and 2008 cycle. So, you know, she has too much baggage. She had too much baggage. It was well known for many years that she had a lot of problems in the closet, and they all began to come out, and then they flooded out through WikiLeaks.
Well, you mentioned the popular vote and having won the popular vote, but that's not really significant because the campaign was run based on the rules, which are the rules of the Electoral College.
Well, you're absolutely right about that, but here's the truth. The United States is the only advanced democracy that does not permit direct election of the head of state and the head of government. In any other advanced democracy, Hillary Clinton would be headed towards the inauguration in January. The Electoral College, of course, is anti-democratic. It's plutocratic. It was created in order to reinforce and ensure the rights and possessions and status of the elite.
Well, that might be true, but isn't the time for reform, let's say right now, after this election, then there's a decision made like, oh, the Electoral College is antiquated, let's reform it. For Hillary to claim that this was a factor heading into the election is fallacious because...
You're right. You're right about that. Trump won the Electoral College. He had superior strategy in the right places. And if you really take a close look at the campaign, his strategy of winning, although he lost the popular vote, but winning the Electoral College with over 300 electoral votes was absolutely brilliant.
Okay, so as in the progressive camp of which you are a member, so that right now you guys are vigorously put forward the agenda of reforming the Electoral College system?
I certainly am. I have been doing
it. Is that true throughout the progressive movement in America? Is the progressive media, is this the #1 topic of discussion at the moment?
No, it is not. Well, it is not.
So why not? I mean, if that's what that's what they're claiming to be the deciding factor, you would think they would be more actively now lobbying to address that factor.
I think they should be lobbying more aggressively now to address that factor, particularly the Clinton faction, which is an enormous faction inside the Democratic Party. I mean, the removal of the Electoral College, or the reform of it, has even been advocated by the New York Times in editorials for years. Everyone realizes it's antiquated, it's obsolete, and in fact, in the last 20 years, 2 presidential elections, both egregious, ended up decided by the Electoral College, and when the loser won. 2000 and 2016.
The argument on the other side, of course, is that without the Electoral College, you have New York, California, Texas, and one other state would determine elections going forward. So here you have, with the Electoral College, the ability for states like Wisconsin to play a huge role. North Carolina, the state we're in now, to play a huge role. So shouldn't that seems like representative democracy? That's what was discussed during the formation of the country by the Founding Fathers, and that's the way it's been for over 240 years, and there's pluses to it, there's minuses to it. I mean, look at the referendum in the UK right now. It was a pluralistic vote to pass something called Brexit, but it was a pig in a poke. It was a blind vote. There was no discussion about what it would be. They simply positioned it as a way to get back at the immigrants and people of color, and the bigots voted for it, and now they're trying to figure out what it is. So that's the downside of having purely democratic versus a republic. And the word democracy mentioned in the Constitution exactly 0. It's never mentioned in the Constitution. So it's a republic. It's not ruled by mob.
It's not mobocracy. This is exactly the purpose of the Electoral College. And what you have just articulated is the official conservative Republican Party position on the Electoral College. I don't really get your connection with Brexit, because that was a popular vote.
They went for a popular vote.
Yeah.
And but it was the politicians who were lobbying for an outcome that was a blind vote. In other words, there's no detail in the vote. They simply went down the path of propaganda to position this as a way to kick David Cameron, the prime minister, and to basically make a bigoted vote, and there was no detail. Now that they're discussing the detail, they're saying, wait, we want to do it again. But I want to move on from Brexit, because we're kind of focusing on the Hillary. You're
okay,
more of a Hillary person.
Well, no, I would like to comment on Brexit because of Tony Benn. Tony Benn, the leading progressive intellectual in British politics for the last 50 years, he was always opposed to the European Union because it usurped so much power from Britain. But let's go back. You're right.
Right, but getting at Brexit doesn't actually do anything to change that. In a lot of ways, because all the trade deals that have been in place for dozens of years. In fact, it only makes it worse because they have to hire 30,000 civil servants to negotiate Brexit, and the stated purpose was to extricate themselves from the cost of this, and that all this money would go into the health care. None of that's true, but they will now. It's a job welfare program for civil servants in the UK. That's what Brexit's all about. So you got 30,000 new bureaucrats have jobs, but the poor will continue to be poor, and the rich will continue to make a lot of money milking and bilking the system. Now let's talk about Obamacare for a second. One of the biggest swings to Trump was in the $50,000 to $100,000 income bracket. These are people paying the full unsubsidized cost of Obamacare. The very taxpayers paying for the $20 million now on Medicaid, thanks to the ACA. But what should the strategy have been on this policy? Michael.
The strategy on the policy obviously should have been to expand it and to extend it and to move towards single-payer health care, like Bernie Sanders has been advocating, like Dennis Kucinich has been advocating for many years, and like every other advanced democracy has on the face of this planet, Max.
Right. On this point, I think we're pretty clear that having the interests of rapacious private contractors involved in your healthcare system leads to a horrible outcome.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, what do you think, going forward, the chances of a repeal of Obamacare happening? I mean, you agree that the Obamacare doesn't come close to achieving that goal. The other side, the Trump side, has already stated, you know, it's junk to get rid of it. What do you see happening there? What would you like to see happen?
Well, what I would like to see happen and what I see happening there are two different objects.
Okay.
Entirely.
What would you like to see happen, and then what do you think will happen?
Well, I would like to see what we've just discussed. I'd like to see a serious debate about single-payer health care. I would like to see single-payer health care in the United States. But that's not going to happen, and we know it's not going to happen because of three facts. Republican majority in the House of Representatives, Republican majority in the Senate, and Donald Trump in the White House. So we can just forget that. In fact, what I anticipate happening is I anticipate an extremely strong attack on Obamacare from the outset, probably on the day after Trump's inauguration. I would say that certainly within the first 24, 48, or 72 hours, he will launch a bill that will abolish the ACA.
All right, we will do a little follow-up on that, some more. I think it's an incredibly important topic. Can you stay for another segment with me?
Well, of course, it would be a pleasure.
Fair enough. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Michael Carmichael. If you want to reach us on Twitter, it's Keiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.